The black suitcase, open on the bed like the mouth of a hungry animal, devoured the clothes David folded with an almost festive haste. Emily watched the scene from the bedroom doorway, her hand resting instinctively on the curve of her 7-month pregnant belly. Every dress shirt, every pair of socks, every piece of underwear he packed seemed like a small brick in the construction of a wall separating her from the truth. The excuse was a company bonding trip, a weekend retreat at a countryside resort, just for the team leaders. A reward, he had said, for the last quarter's results. But nothing in David's behavior over the past few weeks suggested celebration. He had become an island, a cold and distant territory within his own home. Conversations, once filled with plans for the arrival of Leo, the son she carried, were now monosyllabic, full of vague answers and averted gazes. The most glaring change, however, was in how he treated his cell phone. The device, once a trivial object, had transformed into an extension of his body, an impenetrable digital fortress. He took it to the bathroom, placed it face down on the dinner table, and took calls in the hallway, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. Emily, with her sensitivity heightened by pregnancy, felt the dishonesty in the air, a static that crackled beneath the surface of forced normalcy. She tried to convince herself it was an exaggeration, that the hormones were making her paranoid, that the stress of work and the anxiety of imminent fatherhood had made him withdrawn. But intuition, especially that of a mother about to give birth, is a force of nature, a primitive radar that is not fooled by logical excuses. And Emily's radar was beeping incessantly, a silent alarm that stole her sleep and peace. "Don't forget your sunscreen, honey." "The forecast is sunny for the weekend," she said, her voice coming out calmer than she felt. David merely grunted an "uh-huh" without turning around, focused on stuffing a pair of shoes into the suitcase. He didn't ask if she needed anything, didn't caress her belly, didn't give her a goodbye kiss that wasn't purely perfunctory. He was anxious to leave, and that haste was the most eloquent confession of all. When he finally zipped the suitcase shut, the sound seemed like a seal on a decree of abandonment. He kissed her on the forehead, a cold, rushed kiss, and said, "Take care. If anything happens, call me. But the signal there is kind of bad. I might take a while to respond." The perfect excuse planted in advance. As soon as the apartment door closed, a heavy silence descended upon Emily. She walked to the window and watched him get into the car, the suitcase tossed onto the back seat, his smile visible even from a distance. In that instant, a cold grip seized her soul, a painful certainty that he was not going to a work retreat. She was being deceived, made a fool of, disrespected at the most vulnerable moment of her life, and a new resolution, cold and hard as diamond, formed in her heart. She would not spend another night biting her nails with anxiety, inventing excuses for the misunderstanding. The late afternoon light streamed through the bedroom window, painting the room with shades of orange and melancholy. Emily watched in silence, sitting on the edge of the bed as her husband, David, folded shirts with an almost robotic efficiency and arranged them inside the travel suitcase. The scene should have been mundane, the preparation for a supposed bonding trip with work friends, an annual company event, but nothing about it seemed normal. There was a tension in the air, an electric current of unspoken things that made Emily's stomach churn. His behavior had been changing for weeks, a subtle but unmistakable shift, like a season refusing to arrive. He was distant, a satellite in an increasingly distant orbit. The man who once caressed her 7-month belly and talked to the baby now barely touched her. His kisses were cold seals on her cheek, his hugs mechanical and rushed gestures. The cell phone, once an object forgotten around the house, had become an extension of his hand, a digital fortress he guarded with his life. The screen was always face down on the table, and he had developed the habit of taking the device with him even to the bathroom. When she asked who he was talking to so much, the answers were always vague. Work stuff, team group chat, a lot of pressure you wouldn't understand. He made her feel like an intruder in her own life, a spectator of a show whose script she didn't know. Emily tried to convince herself it was just the anxiety of pregnancy, hormones creating monsters in her head. She tried to remember the man she had fallen in love with, the charming, attentive, and fun David. But the image was faded, overlaid by this new version, a cold and elusive stranger who slept beside her. Intuition, however, that primitive and powerful voice that had intensified with impending motherhood, would not be silenced. It screamed that something was profoundly wrong. "Are you sure you have to go, honey?" she asked, her voice more fragile than she intended. "It's so close to the baby arriving. I wanted you to be around." David didn't even turn around. He continued to arrange a pair of shoes in the suitcase. "Emily, we've talked about this. It's important for my career. Networking. Besides, it's only 3 days. I'll be back Sunday night. Don't be dramatic." The word dramatic hit her like a small slap. It was the weapon he used to invalidate her feelings, to end any discussion that made him uncomfortable. He closed the suitcase zipper with a definitive sound that echoed in the silent room. He approached, gave her a quick kiss on the forehead, and picked up the cell phone that was charging by the bed. "I'll call you when I get to the hotel. Take care. And take care of our little champ," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. As soon as the front door closed, a heavy silence descended upon the apartment. Emily felt a tightness in her soul, a sense of abandonment so profound it left her breathless. She walked to the window and watched him get into the car, start the engine, and disappear down the street. At that moment, a decision solidified in her heart. A decision born of pain, silent humiliation, and the refusal to be made a fool of. She would not spend another night biting her nails with anxiety, imagining, doubting, feeling crazy. She needed the truth, no matter how painful, and she would have it that night. Her gaze fell on the outlet by the bed, where his cell phone had been charging, and then an idea, bold and terrible, began to form in her mind. David was careless with technology. He always left his devices logged in, his passwords saved. And there was an app he himself had installed a few months ago, a screen mirroring app he used to show photos and videos on the living room TV. He had boasted about how easy it was to sync his phone with any smart TV connected to the same Wi-Fi network. A dangerous idea, a perfect and cruel plan began to take shape. She remembered a crucial detail. His cell phone, an older model, sometimes took a few minutes to automatically lock the screen after being disconnected from the charger. It was a small flaw, a window of opportunity of perhaps 60 seconds. Emily's heart raced. It was a 1 in a million chance. Acting purely on instinct, she ran to the living room, grabbed her own cell phone, and opened the Notes app. She needed the pairing code for her in-laws' TV. They lived in the same high-rise building, just a few floors away, and used the same internet network. She had connected her phone to their TV once to show ultrasound photos. With trembling hands, she searched for the old note and found it. Now came the hardest part. She went back to the bedroom and looked at the spot where his phone had been. The image of him grabbing the device and leaving repeated in her mind. He grabbed it and left immediately. The screen was probably still active. It was now or never. With a speed she didn't know she possessed, she grabbed her tablet, opened the same mirroring app, and typed in the name of the building's Wi-Fi network. Then she entered her in-laws' TV code. The app requested confirmation on the device to be mirrored. It was the moment of truth. She prayed that David's phone screen was still active, that he was in the elevator or the parking garage, still within network range. She clicked, connect, and waited. 1, 2, 3 seconds that felt like an eternity. And then, on her tablet screen, a small notification appeared. Device David's phone successfully connected to living room TV, George and Martha's apartment. She did it. Her heart was pounding uncontrollably. She had created an invisible bridge, a secret window into his world. Now everything displayed on David's phone screen could be transmitted, with the touch of a button, to the television in her in-laws' living room. The plan was risky. It was manipulative. But for Emily it was an act of self-defense. She was not a jealous, out-of-control wife. She was a pregnant, deceived woman, about to use the only weapon she had to bring the truth to light. She took a deep breath, the adrenaline giving way to a cold, determined calm. The stage was set. All that was left was to invite the audience. With the connection established and the plan in motion, Emily felt a wave of adrenaline followed by a chill. The technical part, the most uncertain, was complete. Now came the human part, the most painful, She needed to create the perfect scenario for the revelation, and for that, she needed her in-laws. Her relationship with them was the kind of blessing many women only dream of having. Her father-in-law, George, was a man of principles, serious, but with a huge heart, who treated her with the respect and affection of a father. Her mother-in-law, Martha, was her safe harbor. Since the beginning of the marriage, Martha had embraced her not as a daughter-in-law, but as the daughter she never had. They shared secrets, recipes, and a complicity that transcended blood ties. The idea of shattering their world, of destroying the image of the perfect son they had created, weighed on her soul. But the need to expose the truth, to protect herself and her son from that web of lies, was stronger. She waited about 20 minutes, enough time for David to be far away on the highway, immersed in his secret world. With her heart in her hand, she dialed Martha's number. She rehearsed her voice, aiming for a tone that sounded casual, a little lonely, but not desperate. When her mother-in-law answered with her usual, "Hi, sweetie, everything okay?" Emily forced a lightness she didn't feel. "Hi, Martha, everything's fine here. David just left for that company trip, you know, and the house got so quiet. I was thinking, would I be bothering you too much if I came over for dinner tonight? I suddenly had a craving for your famous pot roast." The small lie about the pot roast was the perfect touch, a bait of affection she knew Martha would eagerly take. The reaction on the other end of the line was immediate, and exactly as Emily had predicted. Martha's voice lit up, overflowing with joy and maternal concern. "Bothering? Emily, you never bother! What a great idea! Of course you're coming. I'll start the pot roast right now. Your father-in-law will be so happy to see you." Martha's excitement was so genuine that a pang of guilt shot through Emily's heart. She was using her mother-in-law's love as part of a trap. "But come now, don't wait for nightfall," Martha continued. "I don't want you alone in that apartment for a minute. In fact, why don't you bring a suitcase and stay here with us until David gets back? A pregnant woman shouldn't be alone, it's dangerous, and I'd love to have you close to spoil you a little." The offer, made with so much love, was confirmation that her plan could work. "Oh, Martha, you don't have to go to so much trouble," Emily began, maintaining the act. "No trouble at all, it's an order," Martha joked. "Pack a small bag with the essentials and come over. I'm waiting for you. We can even come pick you up if you need." Emily smiled, a sad smile on the outside, but inside, her heart carried the weight of an anvil. "All right, Martha. I'll come. I'll be there in less than an hour. Thank you, truly." She hung up the phone and stood still for a long moment, the weight of the decision crushing her. That night would not just be a family dinner. It would be a watershed moment. It would be the night she would reclaim her dignity or lose everything forever, the night that would decide her future and the future of her son. With a deep sigh, she went to the bedroom, grabbed a small suitcase, and began to pack not just clothes, but the fragments of a life that was about to change forever. The short walk of a few floors to her in-laws' apartment felt like a journey of miles. Every step was heavy, every breath a countdown to detonation. Upon arriving, she was greeted with Martha's warm hug and George's affectionate smile. Their apartment smelled like home: tomato sauce simmering slowly, a freshly baked apple pie, and a gentle scent of cleaning products. It was a stark contrast to the sterile silence and tension that had taken over her own home. For a moment, she wished she could simply surrender to that comfort, forget her plan, and pretend everything was fine. But David's face smiling as he drove away, the image of him lying so easily, brought her back to reality. "It's good you came, sweetie. I already missed you," George said, taking the small suitcase from her hand. "Your guest room is ready. Make yourself at home, as always." Their kindness was a double-edged sword, making what she was about to do even harder. Martha pulled her into the kitchen. "Come, help me finish the sauce, and tell me all about your last appointment. Is Leo behaving in there?" The two cooked together, as they had done so many times. They laughed, talked about the nursery, about the baby's kicks, about the anxieties and joys of impending motherhood. Emily felt like an actress in her most challenging role, smiling and talking, while her insides were a knot of nerves and anticipation. She looked at her mother-in-law's face, so full of love for her and the grandchild on the way, and wondered if that love would survive the truth. The moment came after dessert. George leaned back in his chair, satisfied, and Martha began to collect the plates, talking about how they needed to baby-proof the apartment. It was now. If she waited any longer, her courage might abandon her. With hands sweating cold, Emily stood up. "George, Martha, wait a moment. Before we clear the table, I need to show you something." The change in her tone of voice, the sudden seriousness, made both of them stop what they were doing and look at her with an expression of curiosity and concern. "What is it, sweetie? You look pale. Are you feeling okay?" Martha asked, her hand already on Emily's arm. Emily shook her head, trying to maintain her composure. "I'm fine, but there's something that's not fine. Something I've been suspicious of for a while, and I didn't have the courage to see it alone. I need your support." She walked to the living room media console, where the small tablet was discreetly placed. She picked it up and then the television remote. Her fingers trembled so much, she almost dropped it. George and Martha exchanged glances, confusion stamped on their faces. "Emily, you're scaring us. What's going on?" George said, his voice grave. Emily turned to them, her eyes teary, but her expression determined. "I just ask that you watch with me, and that you believe me." She pressed the power button on the TV. The screen lit up, showing the end of a local news broadcast. Then, with the tablet in hand, she opened the mirroring app. The interface was simple. There was a large red button that said, "Start broadcast." She took a deep breath, a last gulp of air before diving into unknown waters, and pressed the button. For a second, nothing happened. The TV screen continued to show the news. Emily's heart sank. Had the connection dropped? Had David turned off his phone? But then the image flickered. The news anchor's face was replaced by a familiar lock screen, a photo of Emily and David, smiling, taken on vacation the previous year. The image of a happy couple, a blatant lie. Martha let out a gasp of confusion. "Wait, that's David's phone screen." Before she could finish the sentence, the image changed again. The screen was unlocked, revealing his phone's interface. And then, a messaging app was opened. The silence that fell in the dining room was not a silence of peace. It was a heavy, dense silence, the silence that precedes a disaster. It was as if the air had been suddenly sucked out of the room. George leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, trying to understand what he was seeing. Martha brought her hand to her mouth, her face paling with every second. Emily remained standing, the tablet in her hands like a weapon, her heart pounding uncontrollably but her body strangely firm. The show was about to begin, and there would be no applause at the end, only the wreckage of a family. The first image that materialized on the 60-inch screen was that of a hotel room, impersonal, generic, with a messy bed and a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the nightstand. And then, the phone's camera, probably propped up somewhere, turned, and David's figure came into focus. He was shirtless, wearing only shorts, his hair disheveled. He grabbed the whiskey bottle, took a long swig directly from the neck, and let out a laugh. A loud, free laugh that echoed through his parents' dining room with obscene cruelty. "Freedom!" he shouted to someone off camera. "Now this is living. No pregnant wife complaining in my ear. No having to massage swollen feet. I've never been this free in my life." The sound of George's breathing stopped. He was frozen, the fork halfway to his mouth, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. Martha let out a low moan, a sound of pure pain, and brought both hands to her mouth, as if to prevent a scream from escaping. Her eyes, fixed on the screen, were wide, filled with a pain that Emily felt physically. Seeing the image of her son, the son she had raised with so much love and principle, behaving like a scoundrel mocking his pregnant wife, was a betrayal that hit her on a visceral level. Emily, in turn, felt a wave of nausea, but also a strange and cold validation. She wasn't crazy. Her intuition hadn't failed. The pain was real, but the certainty that accompanied it was, in a distorted way, liberating. She closed her hand over her belly, not in a gesture of pain, but of strength. It was for that little being that she was doing this, to protect him from that man on the screen. The scene in the hotel room continued. David began to dance awkwardly to the sound of loud, vulgar music playing in the background. He talked to the person holding the camera, making crude jokes about his marriage, about the pregnancy, about how he couldn't wait to make the most of the weekend. Every word was a new blow to George and Martha. The image of the exemplary son, the devoted husband, was being systematically demolished live in their living room. That was the first blow of the night, the exposure of David's true nature, stripped of his social masks. But Emily knew with a chilling certainty that the worst was yet to come. That was just the opening act. The main event, the revelation that would destroy everything, was about to begin. And she, the silent director of that tragedy, just waited, the tablet firm in her hands, ready to let the show continue until its inevitable and devastating end. The atmosphere in the George and Martha's dining room was suffocating. The only sound was the vulgar music leaking from the television speakers, an inappropriate soundtrack for the destruction of a family. George, who was once the image of patriarchal pride, now looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 5 minutes. His face was grey, his lips compressed into a thin line of fury and shame. Martha cried silently, tears streaming down her face and dripping onto her lap, a mother's lament whose heart had just been shattered by disappointment. Emily remained standing, a statue of self-control, although inside she felt the shockwaves of David's every word and gesture. She forced herself to watch, to absorb every detail, because she knew she would need that memory, that irrefutable proof, to stand firm in the days to come. On the screen, David, in his pathetic performance of freedom, turned to the person behind the camera. "So, babe, enjoying the show? This is just the warm-up. It's going to be a long night." The camera shook, and a feminine laugh, sharp and familiar, echoed through the room. Emily's heart gave a painful leap. She knew that laugh. But before she could process the accomplice's identity, the hotel room door on the screen opened abruptly, without anyone knocking. And the scene, already despicable, plunged into a new level of depravity. 3 women entered the room, laughing and talking loudly. They were not strangers. They were not escorts hired for a night. They were familiar faces. They were David's colleagues, women Emily knew from company dinners, married women with children. They entered with the intimacy of those who knew that environment well. One of them, the tallest, carried a bottle of tequila and limes. Another brought bags from a lingerie store, which she threw onto the bed with a shout of presents. The third, whom Emily immediately recognized as David's best friend at the office, the person he always described as like a sister, simply closed the door behind her, turned the key and threw herself next to him on the bed, kissing his neck with a predatory possessiveness. The scene was surreal, a grotesque nightmare broadcast in high definition. It wasn't a simple betrayal. It was an orgy. A multiple planned recurring betrayal. That bonding trip was an elaborate farce to cover up a ritual of debauchery. David's mother, seeing that, could no longer contain her pain. The silent crying turned into a convulsive sob, a guttural sound of anguish and repulsion. "My God, not my son, it can't be," she moaned, her body trembling. George, in turn, closed his eyes tightly, as if he could erase the image from the screen. The shame was palpable in his rigid posture, the shame of having raised a man capable of such disrespect, such baseness. He looked like an old oak tree being struck by lightning. For Emily, the sight of those 3 women, of that sordid complicity, was the final confirmation. There was no more room for doubt, for denial, for the slightest hope that there might be a misunderstanding. The truth was there, raw, ugly, and undeniable. And with the truth came a strange and powerful serenity. The knot in her stomach unraveled, the anxiety that consumed her dissipated, giving way to a cold and unwavering resolve. She was no longer a victim of that situation. She was a survivor. With a slow and deliberate movement, she got up from the chair. The gesture attracted the gaze of her in-laws, who saw her not as the fragile daughter-in-law who needed protection, but as a woman who, amidst the ruin, found her strength. She walked to the television, and with the remote control turned off the sound, leaving only the grotesque images flickering in silence. Then she turned to George and Martha. Her voice, when she spoke, was not that of a woman in tears, but of a queen decreeing the end of a reign. "I will not raise my son next to this man," she said, every word weighted with the certainty of an irrevocable decision. "My son will not grow up in a home built on lies and disrespect. He will not have as a father figure a man who treats his mother this way. It's over." George stood up, his eyes red, but filled with a new determination. He approached Emily and, in a gesture that sealed his own son's fate, hugged her. A strong, protective hug, from a father to a daughter. "No, you won't," he said, his voice choked but firm as a rock. "Not while I'm alive. This house is your home now, and this boy you're carrying. He is our grandson. He is a Miller. And we will take care of both of you." In that embrace, a new alliance was forged. The family that David had betrayed did not fall apart. It merely reconfigured, strengthened, united around the woman he had tried to destroy. From that moment on, everything changed. Power had changed hands, and David, dancing in his fool's paradise miles away, had no idea that he had just lost not only his wife, but everything he once considered his by right. The next 3 days at the Miller's house were a surreal mix of mourning and planning. The mourning was not for David, the man, but for the idea of him, for the son and husband George and Martha believed they had. It was the mourning for a future that had now been revealed as a fraud. But beneath the pain, a current of practical determination began to flow. Led by George's silent fury, they began to act. The first call was to the family lawyer, a discreet and ruthless man. George, in a short and objective conversation, explained the situation and gave his instructions. He wanted the fastest and most devastating divorce possible for David. He wanted to ensure that Emily and his grandson had everything they were entitled to, and that David was left with absolutely nothing but the consequences of his actions. The second measure was financial. George, a retired businessman who had built his wealth with hard work and integrity, was the provider of a generous allowance that David received monthly. It wasn't a necessity, David had his own salary, but a supplement, a luxury that allowed him to maintain an extravagant lifestyle, with expensive cars and designer clothes, far beyond his real means. It was the financial umbilical cord that George, out of a mixture of love and habit, had never cut. That Saturday morning, with a single phone call to his bank manager, the cord was severed. The flow of money was stopped. From that moment on, David was on his own. While the men acted on the legal and financial battlefield, Martha dedicated herself to caring for Emily. She surrounded her with a fierce and protective love, preparing her favorite foods, ensuring she rested, and, most importantly, listening. They didn't talk much about what they saw on TV. The image was so vile that verbalizing it seemed to profane it even more. Instead, they talked about the future, about the baby, about names, about the nursery decor that would now be set up there, in the grandparents' house. Martha, with a strength Emily had never seen before, declared that that house was the home of Emily and her grandson, and that no one, especially her own son, would take their peace away. David, oblivious to the storm that had formed in his absence, lived his weekend of freedom until the last second. He returned Sunday night, tanned, tired, but with the arrogance of a conqueror. He whistled as he went up the elevator, rehearsing the story he would tell Emily about how boring and corporate the event had been. He firmly believed in his own intelligence, in his ability to manipulate everyone, convinced that his pregnant and needy wife would be home, waiting for him with a hot dinner and a relieved smile. Upon opening the apartment door, the first thing that hit him was the silence. An absolute impersonal silence. The second was the order. The apartment was too clean, too tidy. Emily's purse wasn't thrown on the sofa, nor were her shoes by the door. It looked like a real estate showroom, not a home. A chill ran down his spine. "Emily," he called, his voice echoing in the void. No answer. He walked through the rooms. The master bedroom had a perfectly made bed. Emily's side of the closet was completely empty. The nursery, with its newly assembled furniture, looked like an abandoned set. Panic began to bubble in his chest. He grabbed his phone and called her. The call went straight to voicemail. He called again and again. Nothing. Anxiety gave way to irritation. Where could she have gone? Had she gone to her mother's house to be dramatic? He started to get restless, the image of his freedom beginning to be stained by the inconvenience of the situation. He decided to order food on his favorite app to cool off. He chose an expensive dish, as he always did, and when it came time to pay, he selected the credit card linked to the account his father funded. Payment declined. He tried again. Payment declined. Confused and irritated, he tried another card, his personal one. Approved. Strange. Must be a problem with the bank system, he thought, without giving it much importance. He decided to go to his parents' apartment. He needed to talk to them, to find out where Emily was, to understand why his card was declined. He took the elevator, his mind racing, trying to find a logical explanation for the chaos. When he knocked on the door of his parents' apartment, it was George who opened it. George stared at him, his face a mask of disappointment and contained fury. "What are you doing here?" George asked, his voice devoid of any affection. "Dad, what's going on? Why is Emily here? Why aren't you answering my calls?" David blurted out, his voice a mixture of confusion and accusation. George took a step forward. "We saw, David. We saw everything." "Saw what?" he stammered, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. "We saw your company retreat. We saw your freedom. We saw your loyalty to your pregnant wife and your family." The ground disappeared beneath David's feet. He looked from his father to Emily, who stared at him with calm, empty eyes, and understood everything. The trap, the exposure, the ruin. He tried to speak, to defend himself, but his father interrupted him, raising his hand. "Don't waste your breath. As of today, you are no longer welcome in this house. And that fat allowance I deposited into your account every month, the money you used to finance your life of lies, it's over." George paused, his gaze hard as granite. "Actually, it's not over. I just redirected it. All the allowance that was once yours will now be allocated to your son. It will be deposited into an account for Emily to ensure that she and my grandson never lack anything. You lost your right to anything the moment you decided to betray this family." David stood there in the middle of the living room, the world spinning around him. He looked at the wife who despised him, at the mother who looked at him with repulsion, at the father who had disinherited him financially and emotionally. In a single, stupid trip, in 3 days of illusory freedom, he had achieved the unthinkable. He lost his wife. He lost the son, who hadn't even been born yet. He lost the money that sustained his luxury. He lost the trust and love of his parents. He had lost everything, and the silence in the room was the sound of his world collapsing piece by piece until nothing was left but the rubble of his own arrogance. David's fall was as swift as his rise to arrogance. Expelled from the emotional and financial fortress that was his parents' home, he found himself completely adrift. The man who boasted of his freedom to an audience of lovers now faced the true and terrifying freedom, that of having no one to turn to, no one to clean up his mess, no one to blame but himself. The days that followed were a dive into a logistical and existential nightmare. The divorce, conducted with the relentless efficiency of his father's lawyer, was a humiliating process. He was entitled to nothing. The apartment he shared with Emily, largely purchased with George's help, was put up for sale, and his share barely covered the debts he accumulated to maintain his lifestyle. He had to move into a small rented apartment, an impersonal space that only echoed his loneliness. Meanwhile, Emily flourished. Away from the toxic atmosphere of her marriage, surrounded by the unconditional love of her in-laws, who were now her true parents, she prepared for Leo's arrival with a peace she never imagined possible. The Miller's house was transformed into a nest. The guest room became a dream nursery, painted in soft shades of blue and white. Martha, in a symbolic act of erasing the past, organized a new baby shower, inviting only the closest friends and family, celebrating not only the arrival of her grandson, but Emily's resurrection. George, in turn, became the fierce guardian of his daughter-in-law's well-being. He took care of all the bureaucracy, ensured she had no worries, and with his protective silence, created an impenetrable barrier against any attempt at contact from David. When Leo was born, on a rainy winter morning, the delivery room was full of love. Martha held Emily's hand the entire time, and George was the first to hold his grandson, the serious, strong man's eyes shining with tears of pure joy. The baby was David's image, a cruel irony that life imposed on them, but no one cared. That boy was a miller, and his character would be shaped by the love and integrity of his grandparents and his mother, not by the genetic flaw of his biological father. David learned of the birth through a cold notification from the court. No one called him. No one sent him a photo. The pain of being excluded from the most important moment of his life was sharp, but even so, his ego found a way to distort reality. He convinced himself that with the birth of his son, Emily and his parents would soften, that the baby's presence would make him indispensable. With this delusional hope, he bought gifts and went to his parents' house expecting to be received, if not with open arms, at least with a truce. It was Martha who answered the door. Her expression was one of cold sadness. "What do you want, David?" "I came to see my son," he said, trying to sound confident. Martha shook her head. "Emily doesn't want to see you, and we respect her decision. You can leave the gifts if you want, but you're not coming in." The door closed in his face softly, but with the finality of a steel wall. David's life became a blur of mediocre work and lonely nights. Without his father's financial support, he had to sell the imported car, cancel his credit cards, and learn to live within his means, something he had never known how to do. The women who participated in that hotel orgy distanced themselves from him as if he had a contagious disease, fearing that the association with his name would tarnish their own reputations. He was alone, a pariah in his own social circle. The freedom he had celebrated so much was now a solitary cell. Emily, on the other hand, discovered a new kind of freedom, the freedom to be herself. With the financial support George provided, she didn't have to worry about the future. She decided then to invest in herself. She started a pastry course, an old dream that David had always ridiculed as housewife stuff. She discovered she had a natural talent. Her cakes and sweets were not just delicious, they were works of art. With Martha's encouragement, she started selling by order to friends and neighbors. In less than a year, Emily's Sweet Spot had become a prosperous small business with a waiting list of weeks. She had transformed her passion into her profession, her independence. Years passed. Leo grew into a sweet, intelligent and loved boy, calling George Grandpa Dad. David became a phantom figure, a story they would tell him one day. Emily, now a confident businesswoman and a fulfilled mother, radiated a beauty that did not come from makeup or expensive clothes, but from an inner peace hard-won. One day, by chance, their paths crossed. Emily was leaving her bakery, now a charming store in an upscale neighborhood of Chicago, when she saw a man across the street staring intently at the window. He was older, thinner, with the slumped shoulders of a defeated man. It was David. Their eyes met through the glass. In his gaze, she saw a universe of regret. In hers, he saw neither anger nor triumph. He saw only indifference. The indifference of a woman who moved on, who built her own empire on the ruins of his betrayal. She gave a small nod, a gesture not of reconciliation but of final acknowledgement, and turned to get into her car, where her son was waiting in his car seat. At that moment, David understood the final and most crushing truth of all. He had not only lost his wife, his son, and his money. He had lost the chance to share life with the extraordinary woman he was only able to see when she no longer looked at him. And so ends our story. Proof that sometimes the greatest twist is not revenge, but the indifference born of self-built happiness. It's about realizing that while some get lost in lies, others find in the truth the strength to flourish. What did you think of Emily's journey? Was the way she turned her life around with the help of the family who welcomed her the ending you expected? I really want to know what this story awakened in you. Leave your rating here in the comments from 0 to 10 for Emily's strength and intelligence. And if you believe in the power of family unity and the ability to rise stronger, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our next stories. A big hug and see you next time.